There are certain mornings when the atmosphere feels impossible to explain. Nothing dramatic has happened on the surface, yet somewhere deep inside you, there is an unmistakable sense that reality is standing on the edge of revealing something it has been hiding. Today is one of those moments. Friday, August 7th, is not arriving with gentle whispers or quiet invitations. It carries the unmistakable signature of a force that rarely asks for permission before transforming everything it touches. As the moon enters Gemini, it immediately meets Uranus, and anyone familiar with Uranus understands that this planet has never been interested in gradual introductions. Its influence arrives like a bolt of lightning splitting open a dark sky, exposing landscapes that were invisible only seconds before. That is why I do not believe what unfolds today should be treated as just another ordinary lunar movement. I believe this is the moment when the answer you have searched for finally becomes impossible to ignore. Perhaps you have spent weeks replaying the same question in your mind. Perhaps this uncertainty has stretched into months, leaving you caught between possibilities, unable to trust your own judgment no matter how carefully you analyzed every detail. If that sounds familiar, then stay with me, because what is unfolding today reaches far beyond a simple emotional shift. There is something much larger happening beneath the surface, something that feels almost too perfectly timed to dismiss as coincidence. Once I began laying every astrological piece beside the others, the entire picture became astonishingly clear. This is not only about the moon connecting with Uranus. At the very same time, at least 3 additional layers of celestial structure are locking together with remarkable precision, creating an alignment that feels less like chance and more like an intentional design. The accuracy of the timing is extraordinary, and that is exactly why this day deserves your attention. If your chart carries Gemini, Virgo, or Sagittarius as your sun, moon, or rising sign, you may experience today's energy with overwhelming intensity. Do not mistake that intensity for something negative. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs arrive with enough force to shake loose everything that has kept us frozen. I truly believe the clarity approaching these 3 signs has the potential to redirect the course of an entire life. Later in this video, I will explain exactly how each of those signs may experience this shift and why the symbolism points towards such profound change. Before we get there, however, I want to address something that many people have quietly been carrying. Have you noticed how difficult it has been to think clearly lately? Have you felt as though every decision required twice the effort it normally would? Maybe conversations have seemed confusing, even when everyone involved had good intentions. Maybe your own thoughts have felt tangled, as though your mind has been moving through thick water instead of open air. If you have questioned yourself, wondering why everything has felt mentally slow and emotionally uncertain, I want you to know there is a reason behind that experience. And the remarkable part is that this chapter is finally reaching its conclusion. In just a moment, I would explain exactly why this mental fog has lingered for so long and why today represents such a decisive turning point. The key begins with Mercury finally completing a cycle that has been influencing nearly every conversation, decision, and misunderstanding during the past several weeks. This is the detail that completely changed the way I looked at today's astrology. Think back to Mercury retrograde. Mercury stationed retrograde on June 29th, and it did not return to direct motion until July 23rd and July 24th. If your experience resembled mine in any way, those weeks were filled with frustration. Communication seemed determined to fail at the worst possible moments. Plans unraveled without warning. Messages disappeared. Agreements stalled. Conversations circled endlessly without producing genuine understanding. Even after Mercury turned direct, did it really feel as though everything immediately returned to normal? Probably not. Many people noticed that while movement had resumed, progress still felt awkward, as though invisible resistance remained beneath every step. The reason is simple, although it is often overlooked. Mercury was still traveling through its post-retrograde shadow. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of the Mercury retrograde cycle. Many assume the retrograde ends the instant Mercury turns direct, but that is only part of the story. The direct station marks movement forward, yet the shadow period is where resolution actually takes place. It is the stage where unfinished experiences finally organize themselves into understanding. Delays begin revealing their purpose. Confusion starts making sense. Miscommunications uncover the lesson they were carrying all along. Everything that felt scattered slowly gathers into a single, clear picture. That process of integration has been unfolding quietly behind the scenes ever since Mercury resumed forward motion. Now comes the extraordinary part. Friday, August 7th, is the exact day Mercury completely exits that shadow. Today, Mercury crosses the precise degree where this entire retrograde journey originally began 6 weeks ago. The cycle is fully complete. Mercury is no longer carrying unfinished business from late June. Pause for a moment and notice how perfectly these events overlap. On the exact day, the Moon forms its electrifying contact with Uranus inside Gemini, the very sign ruled by Mercury. Mercury itself finally steps beyond the cycle that has been complicating communication thought patterns and decision-making ever since the end of June. That level of precision deserves attention. I do not see it as random timing. I see it as a carefully arranged cosmic pattern. The symbolism points towards sudden understanding, arriving exactly where confusion once existed, the question that refused to produce an answer, the conversation that somehow lost its direction, the message that disappeared beneath everything else, the decision you postponed because every option seemed equally uncertain. All of those loose threads now have the opportunity to come together with astonishing speed. The insight arriving today may not unfold gradually. It may appear in a single conversation, a single realization, or a single unexpected moment that instantly rearranges everything you thought you knew. If this entire week has felt emotionally unusual, mentally exhausting, or strangely difficult to explain, there is another reason for that as well. The energy building toward today did not begin this morning. It has been gathering momentum throughout the week, preparing the ground for this breakthrough. The opening days of August carried considerable emotional weight. Venus formed a square with Lilith on August 1st, bringing unresolved tension into relationships and exposing situations where balance no longer felt genuine. Hidden frustrations became more difficult to ignore. Feelings that had been buried beneath politeness or silence began asking to be acknowledged. Then, on August the 3rd, Chiron, known as the wounded healer, stationed retrograde. Whenever Chiron begins moving backward, attention naturally turns inward. It is as though the universe gently closes the outside world for a moment and quietly says that the next stage of healing begins within. Sometimes healing does not begin by discovering something new. Sometimes it begins when life quietly places an old memory back into your hands and asks whether you are finally ready to look at it without fear. That is exactly the journey the sky has been guiding you through over these past several days. It has not been trying to punish you or overwhelm you. It has been preparing you. Every emotional shift, every uncomfortable realization, every moment when you questioned your own reactions has been leading toward a single turning point. As Chiron turned retrograde, the invitation became impossible to ignore. The wounded healer began directing attention away from the outside world and back into the deepest corners of your own heart. It was as though the universe gently whispered that true healing could not happen by pretending the pain never existed. Instead, the old wounds needed to be uncovered once more, not so they could continue hurting you, but so they could finally be understood, released, and transformed in a way that had never been possible before. Then the energy changed again. On August 4th, the Moon entered Taurus, and almost immediately your emotional landscape shifted into an entirely different rhythm. Everything slowed down. Instead of racing toward answers, you may have felt an unexpected desire to pause, breathe, and simply remain still for a while. Perhaps your body asked for more rest than usual. Perhaps your emotions felt heavier, as though they were asking to be acknowledged rather than pushed aside. Even if the world around you continued moving at full speed, something inside wanted stability more than progress. There was a quiet longing to stand on solid ground while everything else appeared uncertain. That sensation was not accidental. It reflected the grounding influence of Taurus, encouraging your emotional body to reconnect with itself before the next wave of change arrived. The following day brought another important chapter. On August the 5th, the last quarter moon in Taurus marked one of the most significant phases of the lunar cycle. This stage has always represented a moment of necessary release. It asks difficult questions that cannot be avoided forever. What are you still carrying simply because it has become familiar? Which material attachment has become heavier than the comfort it once provided? What responsibility, possession, expectation, or emotional burden has quietly drained your energy while convincing you that you could never live without it? This lunar phase does not force those answers upon you. Instead, it gently reveals the weight you have been holding, so you can finally decide whether it still belongs in your future. Then yesterday, another important shift unfolded. Venus entered Libra, and the atmosphere changed almost immediately. The focus was no longer centered on clinging to what felt secure. Instead, attention naturally moved toward restoring harmony, creating healthier balance, and rediscovering fairness, especially within relationships. Interactions that had recently felt tense suddenly invited a different perspective. Rather than asking how much longer you could tolerate imbalance, the energy began asking what genuine equilibrium actually looks like. Every experience during these past several days, the emotional pressure within relationships, the return of unresolved wounds, the heaviness settling into your emotional body, the difficult invitation to release unnecessary burdens, all of it has been quietly building toward a single moment. That moment arrives today. During the early morning hours, at approximately 2 o'clock, the moon leaves behind the dense, grounded earth energy of Taurus and enters the quick, curious, and electrically charged atmosphere of Gemini. Only a short time later, it forms its conjunction with Uranus. That transition represents far more than a simple change of zodiac signs. Symbolically, it reflects an extraordinary movement from physical heaviness into mental liberation. It is the difference between feeling trapped inside uncertainty and suddenly discovering that your perspective has completely changed. Imagine spending hours searching for a light switch in total darkness, only for someone else to quietly reach over and turn it on in an instant. The room has not changed. The furniture has not moved. Yet everything becomes immediately understandable because you can finally see it clearly. That is the quality of today's energy. This is also why I believe the answers arriving now have the potential to settle naturally into your life rather than creating unnecessary turmoil. At first glance, hearing that the moon is conjunct Uranus might sound intimidating. Uranus certainly has a reputation for delivering unexpected events, dramatic awakenings, and sudden disruptions. That reputation is well deserved. Yet today's astrology contains another important factor that completely changes the way this conjunction expresses itself. A grand air trine is forming across the sky. If that phrase is unfamiliar, the symbolism is remarkably beautiful. A trine is created when planets stand approximately 120 degrees apart, forming one of the most supportive and harmonious relationships recognized in astrology. Unlike challenging aspects that demand struggle before growth, trines allow energy to move naturally, without unnecessary resistance. They represent ease, cooperation, and uninterrupted flow. When three separate planetary points all connect through trines while occupying the same element, They complete a powerful triangular circuit where energy circulates freely and continuously. That is precisely what is happening today. The Moon and Uranus stand together in Gemini. Venus has freshly entered Libra. Pluto remains in Aquarius. Every one of these placements belongs to the air element, and each sits within only a few degrees of the others, completing today's grand air trine. This is exactly why I believe the unexpected realization arriving today is not designed to destroy your stability. Instead, it is designed to restore your freedom. Air governs thought, communication, understanding, relationships, curiosity, and the exchange of ideas. The truth revealed through the Moon and Uranus conjunction does not remain isolated inside your mind. Through Venus in Libra, it naturally begins reshaping your relationships, encouraging greater balance, honesty, and mutual understanding. Through Pluto in Aquarius, it reaches outward into the larger structures supporting your life, influencing long-term transformation that extends far beyond a single conversation or decision. The realization itself may arrive unexpectedly. It may completely dissolve an illusion you have been carrying for longer than you realized. Yet instead of feeling overwhelming, it is likely to feel strangely familiar, almost as though some deeper part of you has recognized the truth for a very long time, but simply lacked the words to explain it. That is what makes today's astrology so unusual. Under many Uranian transits, shocking revelations require days or even weeks before their meaning becomes clear. Today, however, the grand air trine provides an extraordinary level of support. Understanding arrives alongside the revelation itself. The moment clarity appears, action becomes possible. Rather than remaining trapped inside endless analysis, you simply recognize what is true and naturally begin moving forward. There is one additional layer unfolding behind today's events that deserves careful attention because it reveals just how remarkable this timing truly is. At this very moment, Jupiter, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus are each positioned at approximately 4 degrees within their respective zodiac signs. Jupiter occupies 4 degrees of Leo. Pluto stands at 4 degrees of Aquarius. Neptune remains at 4 degrees of Aries. Uranus rests at 4 degrees of Gemini. These are 4 of the slowest moving planetary bodies influencing astrology, and seeing them gathered around the same mathematical degree is extraordinarily uncommon. These planets shape collective evolution across generations rather than individual weeks or months. Their movements unfold gradually, and their influence rarely activates without meaningful purpose. When they gather in this way, many astrologers describe the pattern as an immense evolutionary network created through interconnected sextiles, trines, and oppositions that quietly hold tremendous potential beneath the surface. Yet even such an extraordinary structure does not fully awaken by itself. It waits patiently until a faster-moving celestial body crosses that same 4th degree, providing the precise spark needed to activate the entire pattern. That is the threshold we have now reached, and understanding what happens next explains why today's energy carries such extraordinary significance. The extraordinary part of today's astrology is that everything converges at exactly the same trigger point. When the Moon reaches approximately 4 degrees of Gemini and joins Uranus, it is doing far more than creating a single conjunction. It is touching the exact degree where an entire network of planetary energy has been waiting to awaken. Think of it as a dormant system that has been quietly holding immense potential beneath the surface. The instant the Moon reaches that mathematical point, the entire pattern comes alive. That means the realization arriving today is not isolated inside your thoughts. It immediately begins interacting with every major layer of your personal evolution. The insight that suddenly appears in your mind becomes connected to your confidence, your willingness to express yourself boldly, and your creative identity through Jupiter in Leo. At the same time, That very realization extends toward Neptune in Aries, allowing confusion to dissolve, so spiritual understanding can emerge with surprising simplicity. The same moment also reaches Pluto in Aquarius, where deeper structures that have silently dictated your choices begin losing their hold over you. This is why today's breakthrough feels so much larger than an ordinary realization. It has the capacity to echo across multiple dimensions of your life simultaneously. That is not an exaggeration. For the people whose charts are especially sensitive to this alignment, the awareness arriving today has the power to reorganize priorities, reshape identity, and redirect the future immediately, rather than becoming some distant possibility waiting to unfold years from now. There is another detail hidden inside today's lunar phase that deserves equal attention because it completely changes the emotional meaning of what is taking place. While much of the focus naturally falls upon receiving answers, the moon itself is quietly reminding us that this moment is equally about release. Today's moon is traveling through its waning crescent phase. With every passing hour, it becomes smaller, softer, and closer to completing its current cycle. That symbolism matters tremendously. This is not the overwhelming illumination of a full moon, where every truth suddenly shines with unmistakable intensity. Instead, a waning crescent reveals something different. It offers understanding that simplifies rather than complicates. Instead of adding another responsibility, another question, or another burden to carry, the insight arriving now points directly toward what no longer deserves your energy. The revelation may concern an outdated belief that has quietly shaped your decisions for months. It may expose a relationship that no longer reflects who you are becoming. It may uncover a personal story you have repeated to yourself so often that it began feeling like reality, even though it never truly represented the truth. When Uranus delivers its unmistakable shock within the releasing energy of the waning crescent, something remarkable becomes possible. You do not merely recognize what is true. At the exact same time, you naturally release what was false. The illusion falls away because it can no longer survive in the presence of genuine clarity. That release is essential for what is approaching next. Only 5 days from today, on August 12th, a solar eclipse takes place in Leo. The symbolism of that eclipse centers upon personal sovereignty, creative expression, authentic leadership, and stepping fully into the version of yourself that no longer asks permission to shine. Yet embracing that new chapter becomes extraordinarily difficult if your mind is still trapped inside the uncertainty, hesitation, and mental confusion created throughout June and July. That is precisely why today's astrology matters so much. It clears away the lingering mental residue before the eclipse begins opening an entirely new path. You could think of today not as the first page of the next story, but as the final sentence of the previous one. Endings are often underestimated, yet they create the empty space where genuine beginnings become possible. That is the deeper purpose of today's alignment, and understanding that sequence explains why its influence feels so profound. Now let us turn to the first zodiac sign I believe may experience this energy with exceptional intensity, and that sign is Gemini. If Gemini appears as your sun-moon or rising sign, today's astrology becomes intensely personal because Uranus is now traveling through your first house, the area of the chart connected with identity, physical presence, self-image, and the way you introduce yourself to the world. Uranus first entered this part of your chart back in April, beginning an 8-year cycle devoted to complete personal reinvention. Before reaching this point, however, Uranus spent the previous 8 years moving through your 12th house, the most hidden, private, and psychologically complex region of the natal chart. Those years were rarely obvious to other people. Much of your deepest transformation unfolded quietly beneath the surface. You have likely been carrying invisible emotional work that few people truly recognized. Old fears, unconscious habits, inherited beliefs, and deeply rooted behavioral patterns have gradually been dissolving inside what could best be described as a private cocoon. From the outside, others may have assumed very little was changing. Inside, however, an entirely different version of yourself has been taking shape. Today, that protective shell reaches its breaking point. As the moon joins Uranus in Gemini within your first house, the realization arriving now revolves around perhaps the most fundamental question any person can ask. Who am I becoming now? Deep down, you already sense that the identity which once felt familiar can no longer carry you into the future. Mercury retrograde likely made that realization even more challenging. Because Mercury serves as your ruling planet, its retrograde period often affects you more directly than many other signs. Throughout that cycle, you may have struggled to explain yourself clearly, even to your own mind. Words felt inadequate. Confidence fluctuated. Your reflection may have seemed strangely unfamiliar, almost as though you were attempting to recognize yourself through a surface that had become blurred. Perhaps the image you projected to the world no longer resembled the truth quietly growing within you. Today's conjunction changes that almost instantly. The meeting between the Moon and Uranus creates a sudden moment of unmistakable self-recognition. This clarity is not handed to you by another person's approval, advice, or expectation. It rises entirely from within, arriving with the unmistakable force of lightning illuminating a dark landscape. For the first time in a long while, you recognize yourself without distortion. The version of you that has been shaped by people-pleasing, outdated expectations, and conditioning absorbed years ago begins falling away naturally. Rather than grieving its disappearance, you are likely to experience something far more liberating. Freedom. With the grand air trine simultaneously supporting your fifth house through Venus, strengthening creativity, joy, and authentic self-expression, while Pluto energizes your ninth house of expansion perspective and personal growth. Many Geminis may feel compelled to take visible action almost immediately. That action could appear as a dramatic change in personal appearance, the long-delayed launch of a creative project, or a public declaration that surprises friends, family, or your wider social circle, because it reflects the authentic person who has finally stepped forward after remaining hidden for far too long. For Gemini, this is the moment the endless mental replay finally comes to an end. The questions that have circled through your mind over and over no longer demand another round of analysis, because the answer has finally arrived. More importantly, the realization is not asking you to become someone new. It is reminding you of the person who has quietly existed beneath years of expectations, adaptations, and self-editing. Today brings permission to embrace every layer of who you truly are. Not the simplified version that made other people comfortable, but the complete, complex, and authentic version that has been waiting for the right moment to emerge. And for the first time in a long while, you are not simply hoping that version is enough. You genuinely believe it is. Now let us shift our attention to Virgo, because your story unfolds in an entirely different part of the chart. If Virgo is your sun, moon, or rising sign, I want you to pay especially close attention. Uranus is now traveling through Gemini in your 10th house, the highest point of your natal chart, the place connected with career, public reputation, achievement, purpose, and the role you are meant to fulfill in the wider world. Before arriving here, Uranus spent the previous 8 years moving through your 9th house, reshaping your worldview, challenging your beliefs, expanding your education, and encouraging you to question assumptions you once accepted without hesitation. Now that same revolutionary energy has reached your professional life. Everything you have been learning internally is asking to become visible externally. For Virgo, this transition carries extra weight because Mercury also rules your sign. The Mercury retrograde cycle during June and July likely felt especially frustrating. Professional conversations may have broken down unexpectedly. Communication with supervisors or management may have become confusing. Projects could have stalled despite your best efforts, leaving you wondering why progress seemed impossible even when you were doing everything correctly. Beneath those external frustrations, another feeling may have quietly grown stronger. You may have sensed that your professional direction no longer reflected the person you were becoming, yet every attempt to identify the problem seemed to dissolve before you could define it clearly. Today, that uncertainty begins disappearing. As the moon joins Uranus in your 10th house, clarity arrives regarding your vocational path. For some Virgos, the answer appears through external circumstances. An unexpected opportunity may emerge in a field you never seriously considered before. A restructuring within your workplace could suddenly create possibilities that did not exist yesterday. Someone in a position of authority may leave, opening a door that no one anticipated. For others, the breakthrough happens entirely within. You may experience a powerful inner realization that your current position no longer challenges you, that your talents have outgrown the environment around you, or that the perfectionism and relentless sense of obligation that once fueled your career are no longer supporting your future. Virgos are naturally thoughtful decision-makers. You rarely enjoy acting without careful planning, and dramatic leaps of faith usually feel uncomfortable. Yet today's astrology suggests something different. The grand air trine harmonizes your 2nd house through Venus, strengthening themes of income and personal resources, while Pluto energizes your 6th house of daily work, routines, and practical contribution. Because of that support, embracing a new direction does not resemble reckless risk-taking. Instead, it reveals itself as the most intelligent and strategic decision available. Whether that shift involves adopting new technology, launching an independent path, changing industries, or redefining your professional identity altogether, today's clarity helps you recognize that remaining where you are may actually carry greater risk than moving forward. The uncertainty you've been carrying begins giving way to a feeling that may surprise you. Genuine excitement returns. Instead of fearing what lies ahead, you begin anticipating it. If those words seem almost impossible to believe right now, pay close attention by this evening, because I believe the emotional atmosphere surrounding your future will already begin feeling noticeably different. Now we arrive at Sagittarius, and in many ways this may be the most emotionally intense experience among the 3 signs. If Sagittarius appears as your sun, moon, or rising sign, Uranus is now moving through Gemini in your 7th house, the area governing committed partnerships, marriage, business alliances, and every significant one-to-one relationship in your life. This is the house of the other. For a sign that naturally treasures independence and personal freedom, hosting Uranus in this part of the chart creates an especially powerful dynamic. Throughout this summer's Mercury retrograde, relationship themes may have become increasingly difficult to ignore. Important conversations may have seemed impossible to complete. Negotiations may have repeatedly stalled. Interactions with a partner may have circled around the same unresolved issues without ever reaching genuine understanding. Beneath those repeated experiences, you may have carried a persistent feeling that something essential within a significant relationship no longer felt right. Yet every attempt to identify the exact issue seemed to slip away before becoming fully clear. Today, that uncertainty no longer remains hidden. As the moon joins Uranus in your 7th house, the truth surrounding your partnerships becomes impossible to avoid. With extraordinary objectivity, you begin recognizing whether an important relationship is genuinely built upon mutual growth, authentic compatibility, and shared evolution, or whether it has simply continued because of routine, obligation, familiarity, or fear of change. The uncertainty dissolves. The endless hope that circumstances might somehow improve without meaningful action loses its grip because the answer stands directly in front of you. That realization may arrive through an external event. A partner could reveal something unexpected, an unforeseen message may appear. A document could provide information you were not anticipating. Someone's sudden change in behavior might expose their true intentions more clearly than words ever could. Yet for many Sagittarians, the breakthrough will occur internally. A single moment of unmistakable knowing changes the way you interpret the entire relationship. Does this automatically mean every Sagittarius experiences separation today? Certainly not. For some people, Uranus liberates the relationship itself rather than ending it. Old patterns are disrupted, unnecessary rules disappear, and fresh possibilities breathe new life into an existing partnership. For others, however, the realization is that the relationship has already completed its purpose. Uranus rarely favors prolonged endings. It removes what no longer belongs with remarkable speed. Even then, the larger astrology surrounding today offers extraordinary support. The grand air trine links your 11th house through Venus, strengthening community, future aspirations, and supportive connections, while Pluto energizes your 3rd house of communication, helping you express yourself with unusual precision and honesty. You no longer feel compelled to over-explain your choices or apologize for honoring your own needs. One profound understanding begins settling into place. Authentic partnership should never require abandoning your own freedom. That realization has the power to transform everything. Whether you continue walking beside another person or begin the next chapter independently, the important difference is that you move forward as your genuine self. As we bring all of today's astrology together, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. None of these events exist separately from one another. The conjunction between the Moon and Uranus, Mercury finally clearing its post-retrograde shadow, and the grand air trine unfolding across the sky are not isolated occurrences. Together, they form preparation for what comes next. 5 days from now, on August 12th, a solar eclipse takes place in Leo. That eclipse emphasizes creative sovereignty, personal empowerment, courageous self-expression, and the willingness to lead your own life from the heart. Yet stepping into that new beginning would be extraordinarily difficult if your thoughts remain trapped inside the confusion and hesitation that accumulated throughout June and July. That is why today's astrology matters so deeply. It clears the mental landscape before the eclipse arrives. It removes lingering uncertainty so you can meet the next chapter with confidence instead of hesitation. Then, on August 28th, the full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces completes another important stage by dissolving whatever emotional residue still remains. Seen together, the entire month forms a remarkable progression, moving from confusion into clarity, from clarity into transformation, and finally from transformation into release. Today stands exactly at the center of that journey. It is the turning point where mental noise fades away and genuine understanding finally becomes unmistakably clear. I truly believe that for some of you, this will become one of those unforgettable days that you remember years from now, as the moment everything quietly began changing. Before we finish, I simply want to thank you for spending this time with me. Your presence here genuinely means more than you probably realize. If today's message spoke to something within you, I would be grateful if you chose to subscribe, because your support allows this community to continue growing. I would also love to hear your experience. If you are a Gemini, Virgo, or Sagittarius, what have these past several weeks felt like for you? Where have you been searching for answers? What kind of clarity are you hoping to receive? I read every comment because your stories matter, and I always appreciate hearing how these transits unfold in real life. Take good care of yourself today, and I look forward to sharing the next journey with you very soon.